Lovely. Again, my name is Erol. I use he, him pronouns. Thank you for inviting me to your virtual pulpit, and thank you for being here. I like to start my sermons off with a story, and this one took place relatively recently in my seminary during a history class. The class itself was designed to look at modern events, and the goal was to try to give historical context to these events. The process isn't perfect, and there are many ways to approach an event, as explained by my professor, but the exercise was geared to foster new and creative ways of thinking about an event. Towards the beginning of the semester, one of our small group discussions honed in on the insurrection event, the attack on the Capitol building on January 6th, the anniversary of which just recently passed. As we went around in a circle, it was clear that we all had our analysis as to what historical context gave birth to such an event. Topics like racism, xenophobia, control, mainstream media, militarism, America's propensity to violence came up. And being in a famously left-leaning seminary, I didn't expect a different answer. I decided to purposely derail the conversation by saying this. I see we all share the same feelings about what happened and why it happened. But I wonder what was in their mind. If we pose the same question to someone who actually participated in the event, what would they say? I was met with a brief and uncomfortable silence. Members of the group began to open with responses signaling how frustrated they were that they would even have to consider that other perspective when they are so strongly set in their account of what had happened. They were very close to calling me a racist, a sympathizer, and just as bad as an insurrectionist. But in that moment, I was being slowly pushed out of that group. A Buddhism major in our group took a little more time than the others to respond, but his response felt like a balm on a wound. He said, to truly know someone is to understand the source of their suffering. They were truly expressing their suffering, but where did their suffering come from? And just like that, a small beam of light escaped a once tightly shut door. Even for a brief moment, they were no longer insurrectionists. In that liminal space, we were shown something different, their humanity. In that moment, we had extended our hands of understanding across the table. To who, I'm not sure. There wasn't anyone on the other side of the table to receive our hands, but it didn't diminish the action. I wonder what would have happened if the breakout room didn't suddenly close. I wonder where that discussion would have led us. I've done my own soul searching around that event. My partner could recount the days I had to mentally recover from being bombarded by the coverage and all of the emotions my colleagues were feeling. Tensions were so high that both my home congregation and the congregation that employs me had special spaces on Zoom where people were invited to come and process the events of that day. But all I kept thinking about was, this is only a small example of how divisive our society has become. Would an insurrectionist be welcome in our congregation? Would it be difficult to extend our hands of understanding across the table. Acceptance happens when we are able to look beyond the fear-mongering, beyond the noise, and to notice our shared humanity, to notice our shared suffering and where it comes from. Our society has grown cautious of the other, the refugee, the outcast, the outsider, the stranger, because of the narrative that comes with embodying that identity. It is easy to accept people who think like us, who look like us, who have the same education as us, who live like us, who know the same people like us, and believe the same things we believe. And that's the easy part. The difficult part of acceptance comes from uprooting our internal biases and acknowledging them. It comes from questioning why we believe what we believe about the other and what that means in society. It comes from being aware of the ways in which our society perpetuates the narrative that has made us distrustful and suspicious of others. Fear of the dangerous other has given way to anti-Black racism, homophobia, immigration detention centers, flight bans, violence that takes insidious shapes and roots itself so deeply in our collective consciousness that society acts on it as if it were the normal thing to do. Acceptance, or the theology of acceptance, is not an insistence of normalcy. Rather, it is a calling out to be aware of our beliefs and keeping us accountable to them. It calls us to introspection that takes place in community, where we can hold one another accountable for ways moral complacency has seeped into our society. And ultimately, it urges us to resist against toxicity that perpetuates violence at every level of society, interpersonal, institutional, and cultural. A theology of acceptance pushes us beyond our own notions of what's right, fair, and just, and seek truth by listening to those who are victimized by a societal system, especially when larger forces are at work. Larger forces work hard to label them and exclude them. For example, one of the main reasons why the American military-industrial complex is so lucrative and why we as a nation pour hundreds of billions of dollars into it is because of the fear of the dangerous other. The national show of American militarism undergirds the larger and more violent systems of oppression: imperialism, neo-imperialism, colonialism, neo-colonialism. Fear of the dangerous other has started wars and continues to stoke the flames of hatred and push our siblings to the margins of society. Fear of the dangerous other has enabled us to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to the destruction we cause in our wake. Instead of class solidarity, instead of uniting to fight against these larger and complex systems of oppression, we are kept divided. Fear and misunderstanding get in the way of being accepted into communities. When we are accepting of others, we acknowledge their humanity, which is more than just tolerating someone's existence. Acceptance entails recognizes how the human spirit yearns for community and belonging. Acceptance is also a call to action. It is an act of resistance to reject systems of oppression, to resist division in all of its forms, and to stand on the side of those who are dehumanized by society at large. A theology of acceptance builds stronger communities across lines of differences. It gives us the courage to seek out stories outside our own experiences so we can be exposed to a multiplicity of lived realities. As our divisive culture grows more tribal, we have to challenge ourselves to lean into our principles. Our UU principles remind us that there are a lot of people in the world, and we are bound to them. by our first and second principles. We are called to recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and to act with justice, equity, and compassion to our human relations, all of our human relations. Our principles call on us to stand on the side of love. Our principles remind us that we are not excused from extending our arms of understanding. I was once the outsider, freshly dismissed by multiple spiritual communities. These communities had no capacity to support me in the unique ways I am supported now. Unitarian Universalism acted as a shelter for me, a place where I could take refuge. A community, ministers, people from all walks of life saw me in my imperfection, in my humanity, and in my suffering. Instead of probing me, acting on their fears, or questioning my history, I was embraced in the warmth of community, where I searched for understanding as if it were some expensive commodity. It was given to me freely by many people, and it moved me so deeply that something in me flourished once again. Many could say that a theology of acceptance is too liberal a notion for today's world. I would argue that Unitarian Universalism is equipped to lead this charge, strong enough to embody this vision, and empathetic enough to hold others just as they are. Amen and blessed be.